In the spring of 1915, during the First World War, one small Armenian community in a distant corner of the Turkish Empire waged a desperate battle of national survival. Beginning in February 1915, all Armenian men in the Ottoman army were disarmed and pressed into labor battalions where they were worked to death or simply executed in groups. Armenian citizens that had been allowed to carry arms following the Young Turk Revolution were required to turn in their weapons and similarly carted off to perform menial work at the front. In Armenian areas, particularly those along the front lines, the local populace was subjected to a ruthless campaign of arbitrary raids, arrests, and murders, ostensibly to root out hidden weapons and deserters. Among the areas particularly targeted by the Ottoman authorities was the predominantly Armenian Vilayet, province of Van. The plan to cleanse and destroy Armenians in the Van region was led by Cevdet Bey. Within the course of a few weeks, 51 Armenian villages disappeared from the map of Van forever in a slaughter so wanton that even local Muslims were threatened with death for aiding their Christian neighbors. When a group of Armenian leaders approached him to discuss peace, he had them killed and even ordered a widely respected Armenian parliamentarian assassinated on the road to Constantinople. It was already obvious that Cevdet planned to destroy them. A national self-defense committee composed of local leaders was formed, and during secret nighttime meetings, a defensive plan was formulated. The Armenians responded to Cevdet's tightening grip on the city by walling up their homes, barricading their streets, and digging their own trenches. Arms were distributed and mixed Muslim and Armenian neighborhoods were evacuated. On April 19th, the Bishop of Van sent peace overture to Cevdet only to be told, "This country will remain the Armenians or the Turks, but it is impossible for both to coexist." The battle lines were drawn. Turks had at his disposal almost 12,000 men, half of which were Kurdish and Circassian irregulars, well armed with rifles, grenades, and machine guns. He also had a few dozen artillery pieces of various sizes, most of which he placed in the Ottoman citadel high atop the old city. From there he could survey the Armenian quarters as clearly as if he were reading a map and direct his fire accordingly. The Armenians, on the other hand, were a completely civilian force. Most were women, children, and elderly, and few of the men had ever held a rifle. Was established a unified authority, the Military Defense Authority, consisting of Armenak Akarian, Ara Manukian, Katesak Erikol, Bulgaratsi Gregory, Gabriel Semergian, Grant Galikian, and Panos Terlemezian. Support services were set up and distribution of food, medical aid, and arms shop were organized where Armenians made cartridges by hand. The Women's Union was founded at this time, mainly engaged in manufacturing clothing for combatants. In the face of imminent danger, representatives of various Armenian political parties, Ramkavar, Dashnaks, rallied together. The Van defenders numbered no more than 1,500 combatants, who had only 505 rifles and 750 Mauser pistols and a small supply of ammunition. The Military Defense Authority issued orders to use ammunition with extra caution. The Eikstan neighborhood was divided into 7 sectors of defense with 79 distinct positions. Researcher Thomas Duvall states that it has been called both a rebellion and a heroic act of resistance by Armenians against a government that intended to kill them. In the early morning of April 20th, 1915, a group of Turkish sentries were heard accosting some Armenian women caught trying to sneak through their lines. Alerted by the women's screams, 2 Armenian men rushed to help, but were promptly shot dead. They proved the first casualties of the battle as both the Armenian and Turkish lines immediately crackled to life with a deadly exchange of small arms fire. Turks' artillery began to overtake the city, and many died simply because they could not find cover. Outside the perimeter, Turks' men set fire to Armenian properties, which burned well into the night, casting an eerie glow around the city that added to the terror. The Armenians held their positions, and 2 days later, they responded by crawling through the irrigation canals that ran through the city and mined the Ottoman barracks that bordered their western perimeter. The building collapsed with a huge explosion and started a fire that forced many of Jevdet's men to flee, allowing the defenders a much-needed respite. Under the inspired leadership of a schoolteacher named Armenian, the emboldened Armenians now began to organize themselves into a tiny city-state at war. While a newly appointed military committee directed the defense, a provision committee was tasked with rationing supplies, and a police corps was created to maintain law and order. The local Armenian newspaper began printing news from the front, and a specially created Cross of Honor was awarded for acts of courage. Wherever Turks' troops advanced, they received a strong and well-directed fire. Each house was a fortress that had to be conquered separately. Very often, the fighting was room to room with only a thin brick wall separating the two sides. In such cramped quarters, the defenders used their Mauser revolvers to devastating effect, and the fighting often became hand-to-hand with no mercy asked for or given. The Turks began bringing some of their guns onto the streets in an effort to blast through the fortified buildings at point-blank range. When a building was brought down, the attackers immediately tried to set fire to the rubble, but frequently found the enemy already in position to defend it to the death. Behind the Armenian lines, everyone, regardless of age, gender, or class, contributed in any way they could. While women cooked and sewed uniforms, a Boy Scouts troop, organized by one of the American missionaries, carried messages, delivered rations, extinguished fires, treated the wounded, and acted as scouts. Among the many recipients of the Cross of Honor was a young girl who bravely spied out Turkish positions before an Armenian counterattack. Everyone became adept at defusing bombs and digging bullets out of the ground so that they could be delivered to a munitions shop where craftsmen and a chemistry professor churned out over 2,000 homemade cartridges a day. An Armenian cannon was even constructed from melted down pots, pans, and candle holders, and although its effectiveness was negligible, its effect on morale was tremendous. And on top of all this, the Armenian school marching band could be heard playing patriotic songs even in the heaviest of shelling. Turks allowed refugees from the countryside into the city to further strain the Armenians' resources. 6,000 were cared for by Ussher and his family in the U.S. mission complex. By mid-May, the situation had become desperate. The Turks controlled most of the city, and the defenders were almost out of food and supplies. On May 16th, Jevdet ordered the U.S. mission bombarded in preparation for a final all-out attack. The attack never took place. The Turks received news that Russian troops with 2 Armenian volunteer brigades under the command of Sarkis Moravian and Andranik Ozanian were advancing rapidly on the city from the Yerevan, forcing Jevdet to abandon the siege. Then in July, the Russians announced that they were abandoning the region. The Armenians of Van were forced to leave the city. 200,000 refugees gathered what they could and made the treacherous 200 kilometers journey through the mountains into what is eastern Armenia, many dying along the way. It was a sad end to a heroic story that today deserves wider recognition.